Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui, and it has been yet another interesting week. Isn't it fun living in exciting times? But even though we're facing different circumstances today, human beings have this long history of not changing things before they get bad. Usually we like to be confronted with the thick of it, and then that's when the change happens. And that's really the vibe of 2024. I know that's not what you want to hear, but that's where we are. And we can live in fear of it, or we can be empowered by the fact that we actually have the opportunity to make things better for all human beings, if we take it. And some of us don't want to take it. The other day, we had the Met Gala, which happens every year. Did a little post on TikTok about it that went a little viral, and it pissed some people off, as I thought it might. Because some people aren't interested in the truth if it doesn't fit their preconceived notions of reality. And that's part of the problem. But I was talking about how things like the Met Gala, like the Super Bowl, these big entertainment events, or even just like our everyday TV shows and celebrity gossip, and what's going on in our lives and who's doing what to who in town and all of the details that make up our day-to-day. I was talking about how the existing power structures bank on us being too distracted to resist or speak up or organize and get together and actually build alternative systems that could demand change. A general strike, which we could do. We could stop majority of crucial economic activity, and the powers that be would be forced to listen to us because we know it's all about the money. But that takes work, organizing. It takes learning to communicate, learning to work together with people who don't have 100% the same ideas that you do. It might even take giving up some of your comforts, your conveniences, maybe some of your extra resources or supplies, or your free time, your attention, so that you could do the work that needs to be done by all of us, not just you. It's all of us. And this is not a new concept. It's not a concept that I invented. The concept of bread and circuses has been around since at least the 2nd century. It was actually a phrase coined by a Roman poet. And it's really about satisfying the people with bread, of course, our basic needs, and circuses, which is our entertainment, our Met Galas, and the like. I had a lot of people on my post try to tell me that they didn't care about the Met Gala, and I'm like, that's really not the point. There's a million ways that we can be distracted and entertained into not doing anything about the serious issues that we are facing. And the way that we've seen leadership ignoring constituents, like the whole thing is that, allegedly that's what they're supposed to do, right? Listen to us. We've seen them actively ignoring their constituents and overwhelmingly voting in favor of continuing to fund Israel. And I think one of the reasons why they're not really doing anything about it is because they are so used to us being distracted. People will get upset about things for a few months, and then enough time passes and, life gets in the way. And, we want to have fun, and we've got to live our lives. Self-care, right? And then then they start passing bills trying to censor us. And they're arresting students for speaking out about the genocide that we're funding. And they're ignoring the other things that the U.S. is involved in. And it's because we have our bread and, a lot of us are having trouble affording that, but, nobody's making too big of a deal out of it, People are still showing up for work, still buying stuff, maybe not as much stuff, but we have, enough bread at the moment, it seems like. And we certainly have enough circuses. But like I've been saying, our attention is powerful. They can't force us to look at the circuses. They can. we have a say in where we put our attention. I want to talk a little bit about another tool that they will use. And that tool is the illusion of winds. Rather than getting to the root of the issues, they might paint a rainbow on a cop car or tell people that, we'll have a meeting about it in maybe like a month from now. And then hopefully then we'll do something about all this money we're sending to weapons manufacturers. Meanwhile, bombs are raining down in Rafah. And this is a common thing, right? We're seeing all of these wonderful student protests happening across the country and around the world at this point. But one thing, these are people that are younger organizers typically. And unless they have maybe more experienced organizers or they themselves are more experienced, these are young people that are having to navigate the full force of these institutions and oftentimes the government. Even in other countries, there are police crackdowns on these encampments. So it's not just the US. I focus on the US because that's where I live. That's what I know. But one thing to know is that, for example, student protests, administrators will defeat student campaigns with a few different tactics. And one of those is, after students will escalate, with the encampments, they'll make petitions, they'll sit in, they'll occupy buildings. Sometimes the administration will offer to set up a committee to look into the issue, and they'll make some recommendations. And then organizers sometimes will consider this a victory. And in this case, unfortunately, that means that divestment isn't happening for a while longer. And so this reference that I'm reading from is from forstudentpower.org. And it is a great reference because right now we're at a time in the year. It's Taurus season. It's starting to get beautiful and nice outside and people are enjoying the weather. And it's almost summertime for students. And so you have to understand that these institutions will use anything that they can to distract us from doing the work, from protesting, from taking direct action. And so I understand, I was a student, it's exhausting, it's a lot of work. And especially if you are sleeping in a tent and getting harassed every day and having to face a lot of opposition. It's very exhausting, emotionally, physically. But these institutions will bank on us getting tired. There are a lot of students that are ready for summer, ready for graduation. And for these institutions, it's really embarrassing. They don't want to have these tents and protests happening while they have a ton of guests on their campus and showing off, all this great work that they've done training students. So student encampments that are shutting down before actual divestment is made are giving up some of that leverage that they could be holding over these administrations to make change. Because in this reference, step 4 is, the committee that is considered a victory by some, and it's certainly a step in the right direction, but the committee might drag its feet until summer break, likely when the most experienced organizers graduate. Administration lets committee die or ignores its final report. It's easy to kick the bucket, especially if there's no students on campus during the summer, because people have gone home, understandably. The thing is Palestinians can't go home, and that's kind of the problem. They can't go on summer break. They can't wait a month for a meeting. We really can't afford to be easy to appease, easy to distract with gestures, when millions of lives are on the line every single day that we allow this to continue. A single ticket to the Met Gala costs $75,000, which is enough to get a whole family out of Gaza. But Israel has now taken over the last remaining border. And for now, there's enough bread, and there's plenty of circuses. And sometimes they'll tell you that they're going to do something about it and make some changes and the illusions of concessions, and then they might just do nothing at all. So we can't give up leverage, and we can't let go. We can't let up while they keep bankrolling this war. Today on the podcast, I talk about what we can learn from the student divestment movement if we harness the energy of Pluto and Aquarius. Then I give you a heads up on the wacky astrology of the week ahead. I was fortunate enough this week to be able to make a couple of visits to encampments in the Los Angeles area. We have a lot of schools around here and a lot of young people that are very aware of what's happening in Palestine, and they are rightfully upset. You know, imagine you go to an institution where in a lot of cases your tuition costs tens of thousands of dollars a year, only to learn that the money that you're giving to your school is also being invested in companies that are directly facilitating the genocide that is happening in Palestine. Yesterday, I was actually lucky enough to attend a talk from a professor on one of these campuses who has been subject to harassment and attempts to get him disciplined and fired for saying that Israel is a genocidal state and is not the only democracy in the Middle East, because it's not a democracy at all. But this is a Jewish professor. This is a professor who grew up in Los Angeles, and he's an older gentleman, and he has been involved in radical movements for his entire adulthood. The talk was actually about the erasure of radical Jewish people, which is a tradition that I am very familiar with because a lot of Jewish radicals are people that I have admired and learned from. But there has been this Zionist project to label Jewish people that don't agree that Israel is central to their identity, or that being Jewish means that they can't criticize a state. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of the students that are participating in these encampments are Jewish. So when we see militant police, even Border Patrol in San Diego, coming to put these kids in their place, these kids who are camping out on their own campuses, many of whom actually live there because that's what happens when you're in college. A lot of people live on the campus. Those police are actually violently harming Jewish people, but they're not the Jewish people that Zionists care about. Because in terms of fascism, it's either you're with us or you're against us. And that's kind of what I've been talking about the entire time that I've been doing this season of the podcast. See, with Pluto in Aquarius, there is this energy of forcing people to fall in line, that everybody has to subscribe to the same narrative of understanding, even if it disregards factual information and what is actually happening in the world and in Palestine. You are expected to disregard your individual beliefs, your experiences, even things that you have seen with your own eyes are subject to question because you are not falling in line. And that is why I talk so much about understanding who you are as an individual. Because when you understand who you are and what's important to you, you can't be subject to somebody else's idea of how you should be, because it'll be inauthentic. And I see these kids at these encampments, which, by the way, as a 33-year-old person, was a good reminder of just how young these people are. I haven't really been on a college campus since I myself was in college. And man, I felt so old compared to these kids. These are kids whose brains are still growing, right? Like, our brains are not fully formed until we're about 25 years old. So these are really young people, and that's not to discredit what they're doing at all, because it is vital. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. But there's a reason that they're coming at these kids so hard. And no, this is not the first time that protests have been met with police violence. It will not be the last. In fact, I have my eye on May 8th as a date which could be pretty intense in terms of the police response to these encampments. I really hope that that is not the case. And of course, as I'm recording this, Rafah is under attack. So it's really important that we keep our focus on the point of these encampments, right? They are drawing attention to the fact that we have been facilitating this genocide in Palestine for months and months now. And of course, our involvement predates October. The professor that I saw speak was encouraging the students at this encampment because he understands, as somebody who has been involved in organizing for decades, that resistance to what we're doing is just part of it. It is part of the territory, because most people are going to accept the narratives that they are being fed, look the other way. Oh, these kids, they're making trouble. Never mind the fact that the violence starts when the police step on campus and start cracking skulls and shooting rubber bullets point blank at young people. If you're not familiar with the history of Kent State, I would look into that, because it's not the first time that law enforcement has been used to silence and put down and intimidate people that are speaking out against what their government is doing. And historically speaking, student movements have been some of the biggest harbingers of change. And why is that? Well, first of all, we live in a society and in a world that, generally speaking, insists that we need to work jobs to survive. And obviously, there are some exceptions to that. If you are very wealthy, for example, doesn't matter if you work or not, right? Nobody expects you to do that if you're very wealthy. Oh, you deserve it. You got all that money. You might as well enjoy it. That's the thinking. You earned it, right? Never mind that a lot of people get very wealthy off of exploiting other people's labor, skimming off the top and taking it for yourself. But that's a subject for another time, I think. The rest of us, however, we're expected to work. We're expected to put in our 40 plus hours a week if we're lucky. Hopefully we have a job that pays us a living wage, but that's becoming more and more rare. So we're exhausted. A lot of us are struggling financially. We're not being paid enough. We don't have a lot of free time. And if we do have free time, maybe we're tired, maybe we're distracted, we want to go and, watch our shows. And I love television. I'm not criticizing people for enjoying entertainment, but it's all very look the other way. But if you're a student, you're one of the few groups in this country that is kind of allowed to not work. And you're a little bit outside of the system, even though these institutions, as we are seeing, are very entrenched in the system. They're very invested in it, like financially, in terms of their time, their money, also their ideas. The ideas that they spread are often very imperialist at their core. And it's not every professor, it's not everybody at every school. I know this. I'm talking about the institutions themselves. But students are uniquely in a position that makes it easier for them to take a stand, which is why I have been encouraging people to sort of adopt at least one of their local student encampments, because it's really important that those of us who aren't able to, camp out and resist in this way support those of us who can. That is part of the strategy that we need to be looking at as we move forward. I have said before, we are in a time of radical change. That doesn't mean that everything is going to magically come together. What it is going to mean is that we are going to continue having these moments where things continuing as usual makes people increasingly aware of how disempowered they are, and the fact that the government and the people in power are really not interested in democracy. They're not interested in the people's opinions on what they're doing with our tax money. And, they don't have to worry too much about it because, again, most of us are too busy trying to survive this system. And if we're not doing that, usually we are entertaining ourselves in some way or another. And so why is it always young people? Why is it always young people? And of course, I know that these encampments are also being assisted by people that are not students and that are probably older, more experienced. There have been a lot of teach-ins at these encampments. I know one of my local encampments here has been hosting different workshops and trainings from local organizations that have been doing community organizing for a very long time. But young people these days, in my observation, are very let down by the reality of the world. I graduated from college in 2012, and it was just after the financial crash of 2008, and the job prospects were not looking good. We had been pretty prepared for that mentally because we spent our entire college careers observing what was happening in the world. That's kind of what you do when you're at school, unless you're, tunnel vision, but you're being exposed to a lot of information. And what are we doing learning all this shit if we don't act on people losing their lives en masse? Like, what is it all for if we can't do anything about the shit that matters? Learning for learning's sake and doing absolutely nothing practical with the horrific shit that you're learning about is wrong. It's unconscionable. We are not brains in a jar to consume information and consume entertainment and do nothing about what's happening in the world around us. And students are often not yet too entrenched in the system, even though, yes, we are conditioned to normalize the system that many of us were raised in. But before you have a quote-unquote real job and a career and a family and all these other things that most college students don't necessarily have, you have a lot more liberty to do things like these long-term encampments that are acts of resistance. This is direct action. It is highly embarrassing for these institutions to have their students camped out on their lawns resisting what their schools are doing. They're humiliated right now, and they're freaking out because this is a lot for them to deal with, and they don't really know what to do. There are too many of them, which is one of the beauties of this project, is that they just keep popping up. It's like whack-a-mole out there. And that is exactly what we want them to feel, that there are too many of us for them to continue quashing this movement. They're going to try. They are going to try. And they're going to fail. Because people are not just going to look away from this injustice. Even if you don't care about the Palestinian people, which I, of course, think that you should. This is a dangerous precedent for all people. The United States government does not value human life. We know that. We can see it every day here. And then if you look abroad, there's just all the more evidence that that is true. And that's what fascism does. It dehumanizes people. It makes some people less than others and not worthy of being here. Even just sitting on a lawn at your school with your friends and comrades is too violent for them. And that's why they bring violence when law enforcement shows up, because they need to be able to say that there was violence in order to turn public opinion against these encampments. To act like these young people are all infiltrators, that they're not real Americans. Kind of like some Jewish people that are resisting this are being considered not real Jews. You see how that works? It's us versus them. And it's really concerning because we have seen agitators show up at a lot of these encampments and put a lot of people in danger. Last week we had the UCLA encampment was aggressively attacked by outside agitators while the police just stood there and watched. But why are they so scared of these kids and their tents and their collaboration and their communication? What could be scary about that? Well, if you go to one of these encampments, you will probably see a lot of information being shared, a lot of cooperation, people organizing, taking care of each other, because when you live in a shared space, it requires a lot of communication. People have different roles that they're playing, and nobody's getting paid for this. This is something that people are doing because of their values, of their morality. It's a huge fuck you to the capitalist system that we live in, much like the Occupy movement was trying to be. And they know that if regular people go and check these encampments out and see what's actually happening there, the cooperation, the learning, that they're going to be in real trouble. Because this is the thing that is actually a threat to them. People working together without any financial incentive, showing people that there is a different way of operating and interacting with our fellow human beings. That we can work together, that we can come together, we can strategize, we can organize, we can take action. They do not want us to take action. And they don't want us getting any big ideas from these kids. These kids who are relying on community support to survive as they do this direct action. Community members have been showing up with food, supplies, their bodies to keep these encampments safe and keep them operating. Which means that these students are not at a workplace. They're not participating in the system in the way that they're supposed to. And that's a very dangerous thing. The energy of that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that we had a few weeks ago is ringing out into this present moment. These ideas are spreading. People are understanding more and more the reality of what's going on and the fact that IDF soldiers train American police. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the techniques used in an apartheid state might be imported to the United States? Because they want the opportunity to put American citizens in their place, as they have been the entire time that the U.S. government has been a thing. But they want to do it more effectively. Kind of like what the IOF does to Palestinians. They would like to exert that level of control over us. Which is why in the Black Lives Matter movement, when protesters here were being tear gassed and hit with other chemical weapons, Palestinians were online giving people tips on how to treat themselves medically. Because they know exactly what this is like. This is what life in Palestine has been like for generations. And so young people are not only growing up in a colonial state, the United States, but they are also looking at a world that has largely done very little to resist the climate crisis that we're in. Something that is going to be catastrophic for the entire planet. And it's a lot smaller than we like to think. But young people, many of them feel that they have nothing to lose because the future that they were promised doesn't even exist. The world might not even be fit for human inhabitants in the near future. We are staring down the barrel of a gun that was entirely preventable. But the people in power don't really care because addressing the crisis that we're in would cost them too much money. So we are expected to be polite and quiet and not make too much fuss and just let them keep doing their thing. And if we and everything we know and love dies in the process, they'll just make more of us. Which won't be hard to do with all of the abortion bans and, coming for contraception and all the other shit they've been trying to do. So they don't want us to have bodily autonomy. They don't want us to have mental autonomy because they need people to keep working to make them profits. And they need people to keep buying shit so they keep making profits. And really, there's no room for us to resist this life that none of us really chose but are beholden to because of the society that we live in. Which is, again, why it's so important for those of us who are not able to join these encampments physically to support the work that they're doing, because they are able to. And this is what I've been talking about for a long time on this podcast. We're not all meant to do the same things, but we can look and see, okay, this is a movement that has a real potential to make a difference in the way that things are being done over in Palestine. And we can marshal our resources and energy to assist them in whatever way we're able to, because we all benefit from their success, no matter what your beliefs are. Because if you can get your ass beat and thrown in jail for no reason, like 45 protesters were at UCLA on May 6th, just for gathering. They weren't even camped out. They were just gathering because the police destroyed their encampment last week. If you do visit any of these encampments, you will notice a sense of radical optimism, but also fear. These young people know exactly what's happening to these other encampments, and they know that they are risking arrest just by gathering on their own campuses. But let me tell you why I feel that this movement is paving the way for our future. When those protesters were arrested, there were community members ready to go to do jail support, which means you basically go and hang out at the jail and wait for people to get released. You connect them to resources. Sometimes you give them food. Sometimes they need a ride home. Sometimes they need connection to legal services or mental health support. There were hundreds of people there at the jail yesterday, waiting for these 45 protesters to be released, supporting them with their energy and with resources that they need. Not to mention when these direct actions were happening and these students put a call out for community members to show up so that they were not completely alone facing off with some of the most violent cops in the country. People showed up en masse. If you are engaging in these encampments, you are creating a foundation for the future that we could have if we worked together, if we taught each other, if we shared our skills and resources for the betterment of the collective. These kids are showing us what is possible, and that is why they are trying to silence them, shut them down, paint them as violent and unhinged and anti-American. Because they want you to believe that caring about people around the world, caring about people in the United States, working together, standing against injustice is violence. They want you to believe that these young people are the bad guys, and anybody who supports them are a threat. And I don't know if you've seen, but a lot of these protesters are wearing masks, and there's a few reasons for that. I have actually seen a lot of these right-wing agitators getting very upset that they are masking. They don't understand why. Why would they cover their faces? They're obviously trying to hide who they are because they support something that's so hideous. Well, when you gather in a group, it's very easy to transmit viruses like COVID, which can take out an entire encampment and make them useless to the cause. So it's actually an act of community care to wear a mask, whether or not you're in this encampment. But trust me, they're going to come for those of us who mask too, because now we are all associated with resistance. They refuse to believe that has anything to do with caring for each other, caring for our own health. Everything is insidious. And people who have been talking about masking for years have already pointed out that the state does not want us to mask because it interferes with their surveillance. Because if you go to a protest or any kind of action, the police have drones and things out there taking photos. And then they take that and they comb through that footage and they use it to identify people and put them in jail. And when you put people in jail, the idea is that it discourages other people from joining the protest because most people can't risk arrest. They might lose their job. They might have their mask ripped off, which is what the cops were doing to these protesters, and throw them in jail where they can get sick and potentially die or be disabled from that illness. They will attempt to control you, humiliate you as much as possible to demoralize you from continuing to participate in resistance. That's actually part of policing tactics, this type of psychological warfare that we've been experiencing. And for as much as I hear people say, the young people will save us, why are we not saving them? Why are we not all helping them in this moment where they are putting their bodies, their careers, academically, and in the future on the line for this cause? The very least we can do is show up for them and be in support of them. Because it's not young people's job to fix all of this mess. If you still have a pulse, I firmly believe that it is your job to do something about what we are facing as a collective. Because it does impact all of us, regardless of how you feel about that. And it's Taurus season. Taurus is about knowing what you're worth. And I can tell you right now, not one single human being that is participating in these acts of resistance deserves the treatment that they are getting. They are worth more than that. We are worth more than that. Because as human beings, we are valuable. We don't have to prove our worth. We don't have to prove that we deserve a roof over our heads or food to eat. That's fucking ridiculous capitalist bullshit. When we understand our worth, we are a lot harder to push around. We are a lot harder to be forced into compliance and bending the fucking knee for a fascist state that would have us all dead or in jail if it could, to maintain the existing power structures. Pluto is moving back into Capricorn this fall. And we're going to see some shit. I'm not going to lie to you and say, oh, all of a sudden everything's going to get easy and it's going to be better. No, the reality is that things are going to get a lot worse if people continue to sit in what comforts they have left and fuck everybody else. Fuck the people who are putting their lives on the line. The time for that is over. It has been over. This is far too late in the game. And they're hoping that you think that you don't mean enough, that you don't have enough to give, that you're not important enough, you have nothing valuable to contribute. You should just stay home and be scared. Watch some TV. Maybe have a few drinks to take the edge off and forget. Pluto is about power, and we are seeing the last gasps of a system that is afraid to lose an inch of power because we demand that things change. There is gonna be a continued violent response to that because that is what fascism does. It breaks you down and tells you that you are less than, that you're unimportant, that these people over here, they don't matter, and it's fine if they get their asses beat and thrown in jail. They deserved it anyway. They were ruining it for the rest of us. And they're going to keep doing it until we get organized and say enough is enough. We stop them. We stop the buses that are carting the protesters to jail. If we refuse to comply, if we communicate with each other, if we connect with each other, if we build real communities based on people power and not somebody being better than somebody else, on the understanding that if somebody somewhere around the world is killed in our name, that affects us. That means something for us because we are not free until all of us are free. If they can do it to them in Rafah, they can do it to you. We have to get rid of this American idea that we're safe, we're untouchable, that all of this is being done for our behalf and for our safety, that these kids are outside agitators who just had it coming. They will keep lying and saying whatever they need to say to get this to go away. Your attention, your support, your time, your body all means something. It all has value. And you get to decide where you direct that energy. And I am saying that if you value your sense of freedom or independence whatsoever, it's time to step up to the plate. If a bunch of young people could scare the shit out of the most powerful government ever in human existence, imagine what would happen if the rest of us joined in. Know your power, know your worth, and do something with it. Keep your eyes on Rafah, on Sudan, on the Democratic Republic of Congo, and support your local resistance encampment. It's going to take all of us, and we need you. All right, my friends. I'm afraid to tell you that May is a bit extra. It is a bit extra, and this week is no exception. There is some intense astrology. And no, that doesn't mean that you're going to have a bad time or that the universe is out to get you. Not at all, actually. There's a lot of transformation and clarification happening this week, just collectively speaking. So I'm not a mundane astrologer, so typically I don't do these types of predictions, but it's pretty obvious even to me that the coming week has a lot of potential for violence. And of course, I am thinking of what is happening in Palestine and what's happening with student protests across the country and around the world. And I'm sure you already know that it's really important to be cautious, especially when you're engaging in direct action. I mean, even just going to a protest these days, there's people driving their vehicles into crowds. You know, we know the risks that we're taking at this point just by standing up for what's right. So I just want to encourage people to take their safety very seriously. If you employ the buddy system, I think that's a really great idea. If you've not been trained in how to take direct action, I would seek out resources or maybe trainings in your area or maybe online. It's a good week to practice safety, and that includes digital safety. That includes protecting yourself from surveillance, from illness that would prevent you from taking more actions in the future. Some of the days that jump out at me especially for this are Wednesday, May 8th, and then Saturday, May 11th, and Monday, May 13th. Those are days that I would try to have a very clear game plan if I could and just be prepared for all possibilities. It doesn't mean it's going to be a dramatic week everywhere. Again, this is just potentials. But we also know the way that law enforcement behaves. But yeah, there's a lot of big energy this week. Another transit that I'm looking at is Sun conjunct Uranus on the 13th. So, approaching that day, we might be feeling a little lit up, maybe more than usual, maybe in a different way than we normally are. It may be difficult to feel grounded in that energy, but you can still make sure that you are feeling connected with your body. You're doing your deep breathing, you're touching grass. If you're feeling anxious or if you're finding yourself getting lost in thought or worry, it's a good idea to change your energy, shift it. Do something that is soothing and comforting. Move your body if you can. Eat something that you like to eat. Smell something nice. And if you're planning to meditate or something like that, don't punish yourself if you don't do it in the same way that you normally do, or if it's a little bit more difficult to quiet your mind. I think people have really high expectations when it comes to things like that. And I think it's really about being with yourself, giving yourself the space to just exist. Sit with your breath, be in your body. And if you're feeling like pent up, anxious energy, it's good to actually move your body, move some of that energy around so it's not stuck and driving you up a wall. You might also have some epiphanies with this energy. You might just have different things come to your attention, new awarenesses, maybe some different ideas. I could also see this energy shining a greater light on collective action in some way. So it's really up to us if we take the shot, We could have all the lights shown on everything, and it's really up to us whether or not we do something about it. But I do feel like people are being continually pushed with this energy to get involved, to take collective action. And as time goes by, there's just like more and more stuff that's just pushing and pushing and pushing. And it's like, what about now? What about now? What about now? The more that we let time go by, we let these atrocities be normalized, and they've already been quite normalized. And the powers that be, as they always do, are going to say, this is for your benefit. This is for your security, because they know that that is on people's minds. That is a tool that they can use to get people to go along with it. They will project the worst intentions on activists, on young people that are taking a stand, on anyone taking a stand, really. So I think, as always, the internet is going to play a really vital role in exposing the truth of what is actually happening on the ground versus what a lot of mainstream media is saying. Like even NPR, I was just reading an article about the measure that's changing the definition of anti-Semitism and conflating it with anti-Zionism. And they didn't mention anything about the harassment that protesters are facing. So I think this energy is going to show us where we need to continue to organize, where we need to continue to work together, strategize, build new systems, and also be inventive about our approaches. The same old thing that we've been doing for years and years is not going to work while technology is changing. Did you know that when you get arrested, sometimes they're taking your personal bio data and things like that? There's a lot happening that is very new and very scary. So we need to be actively educating ourselves and one another and sharing this information, sharing skills, making sure that we're getting informed, getting involved. So you might feel a little pulled like a rubber band at times this coming week, but it may lead to some really inspirational moments. So remember that if you're facing these challenges, look at what it is telling you. What is it shining a light on for you? What paths is it illuminating? And it may not be paths that you're used to. Again, this is a different time. We're playing a different ball game. We can learn a lot from the past, from elder organizers, from people who have been doing this a lot longer than we have. And as always, this energy reminds us that we're not doing it alone. We're not doing it alone. Life as a human being is a collective experience, whether you like it or not. And pay attention to what other tactics people are using. We're probably going to see some pretty cool graduation protests, maybe some demonstrations like that. But I think people are going to have a lot of reasons to speak up and speak out, and they're only continuing to grow. So keep building that sense of connection. Keep building a community around you, being a part of a community, showing up for other people in your community, and be open to some new ideas. Speaking of, I have very exciting news. I have set a date for my class on Find Community Using Your Astrology, which is the book that I wrote. I'm going to talk more about what it means to be in community with one another, answer questions about the book, and hopefully get more people plugged into mutual aid if they're figuring out where they might fit into this movement for collective liberation. The class is happening on Sunday, May 19th at 1 p.m. Pacific, and it's a live class on Zoom. And I'm really looking forward to meeting more of you, answering your questions, and talking more about community and what it means. And you can get the book and the class for all of $5. I know, it's a steal. And you're supporting my work and me continuing to grow and build this podcast and make it even better. So if you'd like to become a Patreon sponsor and get access to the class, you can check the link in the show notes. All right, that's it for today. I will see you next week for another episode of Petty Astrology. This episode was produced by Lori Rivers and brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon.